Alright, got a build overview for my Bladefall Blade Blast Original Sin Champion build. So this one's got a decent amount of stuff to unpack as the build overall, but I'm going to get started with some gameplay first. This character was made mostly for bossing in mind, so that's kind of where it shines. So I think a good way to start it off would be doing a quick Uber Eater of Worlds kill that I've done a lot of farming with this character on, and he does really well at it. I'll do a map afterwards. The mapping's nothing spectacular. One thing that I do want to point out before I start the fight, when I do bosses in particular, I'm running Arcanist Brand for the Bladefall instead of casting the Bladefall itself. Thanks to these relics letting me get Runebinder, I can put 2 brands down and it's just a more mobile, safe, and I think even higher damage setup than self-casting the Bladefalls. But I'm going to try to dodge things on this fight because it is still Uber Pinnacle boss, and I don't want to die, but it should hopefully still give a pretty good idea of the defense and the damage of the character. So we'll get this started real quick. I've farmed this boss quite a bit in hardcore this league, and the character does really well at it. It's been a couple days since I've done a kill, so I get a little bit sloppy, but we'll see. It'll be fine. Leaves me quite a bit of room for error, fortunately. Basically, I'm just casting brands every so often to make sure there's brands attached. And then aside from that, I don't even have to spam my Blade Blast necessarily, because the blade falls aren't instantly building up the maximum amount of blades. It's just a matter of making sure I'm casting like about once a second, maybe a little bit more often. And yeah, that's Uber Eater World. Pretty easy. It's decently smooth gameplay with the brand style because it actually kind of turns you into almost a true dot build where you get to dodge around and do basically your full damage, which is nice. But I do need to switch some things out when I want to map. Put my Corrupt Blood Jewel in because that's one of the things we really need to not get on us when we're mapping. Switch my Flask out, I don't need Lightning Res, and then I'm basically fully swapping my Bladefall out here. No Arcanist Brand, no concentrated effect. I'm swapping out my Awakened Spell Cascade for a regular one. And swapping my level 1 Bladefall out for a level 21. I can't use a level 21 Bladefall on bosses because the Arcanist Brands just chug too much mana if I try to. But we're on a map now, just again, it's not a great mapper. It's definitely on the slower side, but I mean it's fine, I would say, for a hardcore bossing focused character. I can actually just cast Bladefall for most packs if I want to, and it'll kill them, like without even Blade Blasting, you can see. I usually end up getting in the habit of just pressing the Bladefalls anyway. The biggest probably detriment to the clear is just Bladefall Blade Blast is a build that takes a lot of sockets in. If you want some other utility stuff, you really run out of socket space fast. Like, I don't even have room for Plague Bearer unless I want to put it in my 6-link with my Blade Blast, which I have done and it works decently well. But I decided not to do it because I was kind of already out of keybind spots for the buttons that I feel like comfortable pressing a lot. And I wanted to get used to not having it in, since I've been mostly wanting to focus on bossing. Yeah, the mapping is really nothing special. I don't even know if there's much more to show here. But the build is extremely tanky. Like, it's only 5.2k life, but that's pretty deceptive. This is... I don't know if it's the most tanky character I've ever played, but it's very high up there, maybe the tankiest. Against hits in particular, it might be the tankiest character I've ever played. Even though I've played things like 90 all-res Inquisitors with a total health pool of like 11,000. The overall mitigation you can get is just kind of insane right now. But yeah, that's the build. That's the action part. Now I'm gonna kind of just cover every bit, what makes it tick, the combinations I've chosen, how things work. I'm gonna start by just going over the gear piece by piece. So first up, I've got the weapon. The weapon is nothing special really. I guess one thing I should cover is the Original Sin first, before the weapon and all the other stuff. So Original Sin converts all your elemental damage into chaos damage, and then gives nearby enemies 0 chaos riders. Are pretty nice. But I'm using Bladefall, Blade Blast, which are physical damage spells. So when I first saw this ring and I was like thinking about how to make a build around it, I wanted to do something cool and was just kind of brainstorming ideas. Like the obvious choice to me, I wanted to make a character that could boss well. Poison right now, this league is really strong, especially for bossing, because you can just get really good damage on it pretty easily, for at least hardcore standards. I know in softcore, like, oh no, the dot cap, you can't push past the dot cap, so. But realistically, if you hit dot cap, you're doing enough damage to easily kill uber bosses anyway. And so what I came up with was, the first thing I thought about was, if you go LE to Chaos and you want to scale Poison, one thing I knew worked already is Elemental Overload, which is on this scepter. The 40% more damage from Elemental Overload. It's 40% more elemental damage, but if you convert Elemental into Chaos, it actually applies to Poison. And similarly, if you specifically convert like cold damage into Chaos, percent modifiers to cold damage will also scale your Poison, just due to some weird interactions of how conversion and ailment stuff works. So, considering most Poison builds aren't crit, this is kind of just 40% more damage just by default, and that's part of what can make the ring so strong for Poison. And then, so I had thought about some elemental builds, whatever. And then I kind of went a step further and was like, well, what if you take a Fizz build and then convert it into elemental and then convert that into chaos? You're taking a build that can already poison. By double converting it, you can poison again, but you get elemental overload. But then on top of that, you get to run hatred, which is just kind of like the pound for pound best damage aura in the game right now by probably a decent margin. And I thought that was a really cool idea. And I thought about running like a champion specifically because of the 30% aura effect, and you get a lot of aura scaling. And that's kind of where we started. So it's physical into cold into chaos, basically just to ramp the poison damage up a really high amount. From little bits of tinkering and POB that I've done, it's generally, I've seen, so doing this setup is on par at worst up to like 10 to 20% more damage than running a Ming's Heart. So you can kind of think of this like running Ming's Heart, but with more damage and without the 25% reduced life and energy shield downside, which is really strong. So, yeah, so for the gear, this scepter is important because of the LE overload implicit, because that's like the only realistic way to get it. It's too far away on the tree. The weapon itself is nothing spectacular. You will notice it has percent cold damage. That's just that's an unveiled mod, and otherwise it's just a kind of run-of-the-mill +2 decently high investment weapon. You see a lot of these where you get +1/+1 and then some unveil mod, and then you multi-mod the last two. That's what we've done here. Cold damage could have been percent chaos unveil. It could have been like a suffix unveil, whatever. That's just the one I got, and it works, so we're good. And it's just damage. Helmet, I'm running a Devouring Diadem for the EB, because again, EB we're closer to. It's a few points saved by not having to get it. And then also the reduced mana reservation helping us run our auras, because we've got 350% auras in here, and then also the Herald of Agony, so the mana reservation is really good. And I've got the normal ailment duration focus mod, which isn't really necessary, but obviously I'm poisoned, so why not? Amulet's another unique piece. New Eternal Damnation. It's just insane value for elemental mitigation, and they're really common, so you can get a bunch in double corrupt, and you can see this one has Hatred Aura effect on it. So that's just some more damage. And then this combos really nicely with Loreweave, because the amulet does -5 to all res. And then Loreweave hard fixes your resist caps at 78, so you go from 75 down to 70, but then you're just capped at hard fixed at 78. So good combination. Counters the downsides. And again, Loreweave is another item that's like really relatively common, and so it's a good candidate for double corrupting. This one's got some decent implicits. If I go to fully min-max this character out a bit more, I'll try to get like +1 to socketed gems, or maybe +2 to AoE. Since I'm running Empower, a +1 is basically the same as a +2. But that's the big LE defense combo, is those two items. And then the rest of the rares are pretty straightforward other than probably the belt. Shields just got life and suppression and res, and then Cold as Chaos prefix, which is actually a really solid mod because there's not that many sources of elemental as chaos. So it's almost like a multiplier onto our final damage. The Amethyst Ring is just a huge source of resistances. I got a Fractured Life one, and it's just got triple res and some minus mana cost. Boots have ailment avoidance, and then just life, res, suppression. You'll notice this is a pretty high investment character. I spent quite a lot getting the build together. I think it was in the neighborhood of like 150-ish divines on hardcore, not counting the ring because I farmed the ring myself. But everything else, I think, from what I'm wearing, was in the neighborhood of 150 divines, maybe probably a little bit more than that even. One of the more expensive characters I've done, but I think it's been pretty well worth it for just a kind of insane bosser. Yeah, so we've got the ailment avoidance here, which is pretty important that the total on these boots adds up to 64 total, which is exactly that from the implicit and the essence mod. And then also the lab enchant. Crit chance if you haven't crit recently is pretty good for EO uptime. It's a little bit awkward on a build like this because I'm using two skills and the Bladefall hits more often. So the Bladefall kind of eats up this bonus crit chance more often than the Blade Blast does, but it still does help get extra LE overload uptime on the Blade Blast itself. Skip the belt first and go to the gloves, which again are another life, suppression, resists, and then just some standard implicits. We've got Chaos Leech, which is helpful for sustain, and a little bit of our Fisticold conversion from the Benchcraft. Now the belt, this is another new kind of thing that has popped up this league for a couple reasons. It's using the Micro Distillery belt base from Heist, which you can see it makes flasks applied to you have 20% increased effect, so 20 flask effect, but you cannot use a fifth flask. Only the first 4 slots are eligible. And what we've rolled for here is the main thing is those 2 flask suffixes, increased flask duration and increased flask charges gained. Really need high tiers on both of them. And then just some life. And I tried to Hunter Exalt this for like percent life or chaos damage, and I ended up getting randomly flask charge on crit, which is a really rare mod. But because of my character was already set up for all the flask stuff I needed, it doesn't actually really help at all. It might look like really fancy, but it's not actually really doing anything. And so this is getting us basically our flask uptime. I can hit the flasks right now. You can see this Taste of Hate's kind of been going the whole time. I'm going to hit these 2 flasks. Wait a second because I need to offset for a reason I'll go over in a little bit. And all these flasks are basically set to automatically go, and they should just keep ticking on their own for basically the rest of this without ever turning off. Alright, so what the reasoning for this is it mostly revolves around this flask. It's the new Uber Maven drop, Progenesis. It's an amethyst flask that basically gives you the petrified blood kind of defensive effect, which is a percentage of the life lost from hits gets taken over the next 4 seconds instead of immediately. So if you have sustain, it makes you much more durable against big hits and like one-shot type stuff, because something that maybe would have one-shot you or two-shot you before instead leaves you at like, 20% HP left with a little degen kicking in. So as long as you can out-sustain it, you get a lot of survivability. And that 25% number of the amount that gets converted into a dot will scale with flask effect. And so I've got this flask, which is just huge defense value. I have a Taste of Hate, which is really good defense value. Fizz taken as cold, and it gives us some damage with Fizz gained as cold. And then obviously the Sapphire flask less cold stuff. And then just a kind of run-of-the-mill Granite flask with extra armor, and a Quicksilver flask with life regen. Whatever flasks I'm putting in here, you can effectively assume that they're going to be up all the time. They essentially have permanent uptime. and I've actually had them sit like this, just ticking on their own, for I think almost 2 hours without ever turning off. Because other than the Taste of Hate, these three are set to be reused at the end of their effect. So if they ever run out of charges and don't have enough charges to be used again, the automation stops. But I had them run for 2 hours straight without ever stopping. So they're effectively permanent flasks. But that's all the actual gear itself. I'll do the gems real quick. The gems aren't anything too special. In the weapon, I've got Flame Dash and a cast no damage taken Molten Shell. I showed it in the helmet already, but I've got my auras, which is Grace, Herald of Agony, Hatred, and Determination. Shield's got a Defiance banner, which I don't need in the helmet because it's already a low reservation, but it's actually free because we're a champion. And then Withering Step and Temp Chains. The boots has the Bladefall setup, which for mapping is Spell Cascade, Unleash, and Faster Casting. Or for bossing, it's Arcanist Brand, Awakened Cascade, and Anomalous Concentrated Effect, which gets you even less AoE. You actually want your Bladefall AoE as low as possible, so you'll see like the Spell Cascade is level 1 and it has no quality. The Bladefall has no quality because that's increased AoE. Those are bad. My Awakened Spell Cascade is level 1 with no quality. And I think Arcanist Brand might even gain increased AoE values at higher levels, so that's also stuck at level 1. Then in the gloves, I've got a Divine Blessing setup, which is Malevolence, the second damage aura, just regular Divine Blessing, Malevolence, alt quality Inspiration, alt quality increased duration to get the cost down so it's not chunking away a huge amount of energy shield. And then the body armor is our main Blade Blast setup, which I actually have an Anomalous Blade Blast, which is specifically because I have some AoE on Jewel corruptions because I spam corrupted a bunch of jewels trying to get Corrupt Blood immunity. Wasn't able to get it after a lot of tries and just kind of gave up. But I gained like 9% AoE, which basically on its own doesn't give me another radius on the Blade Blast, but it let me replace the default AoE quality with an alt quality one. This was the only one that I was able to get to level 21 for an alt quality, and it unfortunately lost a little bit of the quality bonus, but it's just a little bit extra damage. And then, but the actual normal stuff is Unbound Ailments, LE Focus, Void Manipulation, Empower, and Increased Area of Effect. So this is Divergent increased AoE, makes the quality get you extra AoE. Unlike Bladefall, where you don't want any increased AoE, Blade Blast benefits greatly from it because more AoE is more overlaps. And you can also get Awakened increased AoE. It has the same amount as this, and it has like % more area damage, but that only affects the hits. It's not going to affect your poison. And at least when I was setting this character up, I think Awakened increased AoE was like 15 Divine Orbs, and this was like 100 Chaos. So it's basically just as good and way cheaper. So would definitely recommend just getting the alternate quality increased AoE there. I think that covers everything on this inventory page, other than my relic, which I showed at the start. But I mean, it's relics. You just kind of get what you get. Mine has 20% damage taken recoup, which I actually really love, and I would say is one of the best single stats I like for this build, specifically because the way it works with the Progenesis Flask. So when I get hit, you know, a portion of the damage gets turned into a dot that I need to now sustain. But when I also have recoup, when I get hit, I'm automatically regenerating a portion of that damage also over the next 4 seconds, so it kind of has big synergy here where it counters the dot. Not fully, but to a pretty decent amount. And then mine also had a little bit of cast speed on it, which is cool, and I anointed Runebinder for the extra brand, which can double the damage for bossing and lets that Arcanist brand setup really pop off. Before I jump into the passive tree, I'll just real quick show the Pantheons. I'm running Solaris and Ralakesh. I basically haven't changed these a single time. Just kind of run them both. Didn't bother upgrading Ralakesh because anytime I'm doing something that can inflict Corrupt Blood, I just put a Corrupt Blood immune jewel on because I don't want to deal with it. Since I don't actually have any way to remove it otherwise, like I don't have a life flask, right? That's kind of what I've given up on my last flask slot. And then Solaris is just really good in general for bossing. Now, the passive tree. We've got a few more key mechanics hidden away in here. The champion stuff is nothing unusual. We've got extra aura power. We've got perma fortify. We've got the adrenaline proc. Conqueror for the 10% reduced damage taken if you've taunted an enemy recently is also pretty good, and it's actually better. Like if you've taunted something recently, it's better effective health pool value than the adrenaline proc, but specifically against hits. The weakness of this build, if there is one, is damage over time effects, and I really like having adrenaline because it means if a damage over time starts to quickly degen me, as soon as I hit 50% life, I'm going to heal back up. Now, there's some exceptions, like something like the Awakener degen pools that prevent healing, which would really screw over this adrenaline heal. I haven't actually done Uber Awakener yet, but that's probably one of the sketchier bosses to do with this character. But I do like the adrenaline proc. It's really good against dots, and it gives you that nice burst of a little bit of damage and defense when it does go off. Otherwise, the main thing of this tree is just kind of get away from the duelist start as quick as possible. It doesn't offer a lot to us. Got my Watcher's Eye here, which is one of the sources of my Fizz to Cold conversion. You can see this one has a big 40% roll. It would be fine with anything 35 or higher, because I could get up to 25 on gloves. And so I would just basically need this plus the gloves to add up to 60% total. Then we kind of go up to Scion. We get some life nodes. This is one of the big jewels, is the Green Nightmare, which is the upgraded Green Dream Jewel from Chayula. It gives, I believe, probably a little overcapped because of some other things, but it might not show exactly. Yeah, this gives, I believe, like 14% spell suppression, because it's causing, maybe it shows them on the nodes. It does show them on the nodes. Yeah, 14% spell suppression, which is really, really good because we need it to be capped when we're not full HP. It gives 5% cold gained as extra chaos, which is pretty good damage-wise. And it's one that I was trying to double corrupt for corrupt blood immunity, which I wasn't able to get. But it gave me a little bit of AoE, which let me switch in that alt quality Blade Blast. But pretty good damage and a huge amount of spell suppression for the jewel socket right there. We pick up Magebane, another source of our suppression. Pretty normal stuff, other than right here on this Flask Mastery. I've got the utility flasks gain 1 charge every 3 seconds. That's really important for this perma-sustaining flasks, which are still going, you can see in the bottom left. We need this 1 charge every 3 seconds, or otherwise it wouldn't be quite enough. Moving over, getting Charisma, normal Mastery stuff. Cluster Jewel setup with some Fizz cluster notables. Ironbreaker doesn't really do a ton for us, but the other notable option there is actively bad because it has like reduced LE damage, which screws us over because we're converting. Battle Hardened is really good, Fizz damage and evasion armor. And Furious Assault in the back, I don't have spec right now. It's actually really solid, but I am really tight on points. So I would like kind of need level 100 to pick this up. That'd be like the last points I'm getting. For the medium jewels though, one is a Chaos Multi one. It's got Flow of Life, which is just some life and damage, really nice. And then 20% poison chance on septic spells on the other one, which we need to cap our poison chance. And in the jewel socket, the first of the Grand Spectrums, plus 1 minimum endurance charge. This other cluster jewel is a flask one. The big thing here is this Spiked Concoction notable, which gives you Alchemist Genius when you use a flask. And the Alchemist Genius buff gives you 20% flask charge gain and 10% flask effect for 4 seconds. So you can see it's up here. It's not permanently up, but the reason when I hit these 2 flasks, I didn't hit them all at once. My Granite Flask and Quicksilver Flask have the exact same duration, and they're set to use when they end. So if I hit the Granite Flask, and then say waited exactly 4 seconds and hit the Quicksilver, and they're offset by 4 seconds, it helps a lot with having this Alchemist Genius buff uptime as high as possible, which is kind of necessary to have the like fully permanent uptime, because the flask charge gain that it gives is good, and then the increased flask effect is also really good. But then the other one here is Brewed for Potency, which gives 10% flask charge gain, which again, I need it. Every bit of flask charge generation I have is like the exact amount I need. I can't really get rid of any of it, or else I wouldn't have the like true permanent uptime. It'd be fine probably without it, but I want to keep it that way. And then the Jewel Socket Grand Spectrum plus Minimum Frenzy. Moving down from here, you can see there's a brutal restraint in. This is giving us the Trader Keystone, which combos with the belt really well because we gain 4 charges per empty flask slot every 5 seconds for each of the remaining flasks. So because I have an empty flask slot, which I needed to have because of the micro distillery belt, this is giving us a lot of flask charge generation, and this plus the 1 charge every 3 seconds and all of our increased flask charge gain and whatnot allows us to just passively generate enough charges to permanently sustain these flasks. And then the other important thing here is that one of my notables, Intuition, has another 10% flask charge gained, which saves me like a passive point because I think otherwise I would have had to spend on something like 10% flask charge gain there. So hitting the keystone and one with flask charge gain is really big. And then going down from here, you can see this little cold wheel. Gives you some fizz as cold, just some okay damage, but it's mostly here for the cold mastery, which is the last bit of our conversion. 40% fizz to cold. Finishes it up. A little bit of poison stuff down here, more poison chance. And I have this leftover flask node, which has 10% flask effect duration. Again, need it for the permanent stuff. I probably don't need it because when I'm doing bosses, I have a jewel that has 10% flask duration. That's really solid. It's got a little bit of recoup. And this covers it, but when I'm not doing bosses and I use my Corrupt Blood Jewel, this one does not have that stat. But I'm usually only using this for mapping, and I probably realistically don't need this node. But I'm just playing it safe. I don't want my flasks to ever drop. And 1 point is fine. Now moving up, a little bit more poison stuff. Just regular poison tree things over here. Don't have Ghost Dance since we are Eldritch Battery, doesn't really do anything for us. Up here we've got Force Shaper to let us get the physical mastery, which is really big damage boost. It's effectively like 20% more damage because you have 20% chance anytime your Bladefall drops a blade to instead leave 2 blades. So you're basically getting 20% more blades for your Blade Blast. Pretty much 20% more damage from the mastery, so that's really important. Then some more aura stuff. And through these life nodes down to Lethe Shade, which is pretty key here because we need the damage over time mitigation because, like I said, that's the one kind of hole in the defense. So for the first second of any sort of dot, we're pretty fine. But as soon as any dots last longer than a second and you take full damage instead of 50% less, it's where things can get a little sketchy. And then finally, this last jewel socket's the 3rd Grand Spectrum, which has the rest of our ailment avoidance, which comboed with the boots adds us up to a total of 100% ailment avoidance. Elemental ailments. And I think that has covered everything. One thing I will show really quickly, I'm going to pull up POB here. So for the flask stuff, POB can kind of estimate it for you. I was told a couple different things of what you need. So if you look at this flask, below the actual like flask stats of the parts you'd see of the unique in game, it has this effective flask stat section. And at the bottom of that, it says flask uptime, 100% average, 73% minimum. I was told originally that you need to have it say 100% minimum, which I think it kind of says with the Taste of Hate. Yeah, it just says flask uptime 100% on the Taste of Hate. Whereas this one has an average and a minimum. I was originally told the minimum needs to be 100%. In my experience, it doesn't have to be. You can see this says 73% minimum. Once I got the average to 100%, specifically with Alchemist Genius ticked, because if I turn this off, I think the average goes down to 90. Granted, my Alchemist Genius isn't up all the time, but it's up most of the time. I found once I got it to say 100% average with Alchemist Genius, and I did that flask offset thing with all my other flask stats, it's worked, and the flasks stay on. So mileage may vary a little bit if you try to do it. Just kind of need to tinker around probably. But POB is really helpful with that. It'll show you your kind of passive flask up times for assuming you're not killing anything or generating any charges anywhere. And again, you can see these flasks are still going. But that's the build. Really happy with how it's worked out. It's extremely tanky. I mean, it's hard to estimate. The POB says with a 10 blade setting on Blade Blast that it's currently 26 million DPS without the focus buff on. I don't know. It's not exactly that. It's hard to estimate it because of the way that the Blade Blast overlaps work and exactly how many blades you're getting. But it's definitely in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 million when it ramps up on a boss without counting the focus effect, which is plenty. For a character that's really tanky, it's plenty to do uber bosses. The only ones I'm kind of concerned about are the ones that have heavy degen damage, which I'll try to tackle them eventually. I want to actually min-max this character a bit more. I've got a new weapon in the works with a fractured dot multi, but it's really expensive. It was expensive to get to this point, but it's really expensive to finish it still. And maybe like a +1 all gems, or +1 socketed gems lore weave for some more damage. But yeah, really fun build. Original Sin is kind of awesome, even if you're just taking it to make a fizz build become a poison build with extra steps. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed. Hope it was helpful. Thanks for watching.